Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something truly remarkable, almost improbable, really. It's the Indus Waters Treaty.
hmm
This is a water-sharing deal between India and Pakistan that's somehow held together for over 60
Yeah,
years.
despite everything. Wars, skirmishes, constant tension. It's quite extraordinary.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack how this thing even came to be, understand the, well, unprecedented crisis it's facing right now, June 2025, and explore what could happen, the potentially devastating outcomes if it all falls apart.
And it's so important to look at these agreements, especially in complex regions. Water is just fundamental. But this treaty, it really stands out for its, let's say, built-in resilience, or at least what was its resilience.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where does the story start? We have to go back, right back to 1947.
Right after the partition of British India,
Yeah.
suddenly you have two new countries, India and Pakistan, and they're sharing this massive Indus River system. But here's the
So
kicker.
geography, right?
Yeah,
The geography, the headworks, the controls for some major canals vital for Pakistan's agriculture, they ended up on the Indian side of the new border.
imagine that. The tap for your farm is now in someone else's house, potentially someone you don't trust.
Exactly. And it wasn't just potential trouble. Disputes flared up almost immediately. India actually briefly stopped the water flow in 1948.
Which caused panic, obviously.
Yeah.
Immediate, severe crisis.
Yeah.
Pakistan even took it to the UN pretty quickly.
So things were tense from day one. How did they even start talking?
Well, the real breakthrough, or the start of one, came around 1951. David Lilienthal, he'd headed the Tennessee Valley Authority in the U.S.
Okay.
He visited the region and basically said, look, the only way forward here is probably with the World Bank helping out.
The World Bank. Back
Uh,
then, it was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And they didn't just mediate. They really got involved, deeply involved. It took 9 years. 9 years of painstaking, complex negotiations.
9 years. Wow, that's commitment.
It really was. And that sustained engagement, it sort of set a precedent.
Okay, so 9 years later, we get to the signing.
September 19th, 1960. In Karachi, you had India's Prime Minister Nehru and Pakistan's President Ayub Khan signing the treaty.
A landmark moment, no doubt. So what did they actually agree on? How did they, carve up the rivers? That seems like the hardest part.
It's the core of it. Basically, they divided the 6 main rivers of the Indus system.
Okay.
The 3 eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej, those were allocated pretty much exclusively to India for their use.
Right. And the Western River.
The Indus itself, the Jhelum and the Chenab, those were allocated for, quote, unrestricted use by Pakistan.
Unrestricted use. Okay, that sounds clear. But wait, did India get any use of those Western rivers?
Good question. Yes, they did. But it was specific non-consumptive uses, things that wouldn't significantly reduce the water flowing downstream to Pakistan.
Like what?
Primarily run-of-the-river hydropower. So building dams to generate electricity as the water flows through, but not massive storage dams that hold water back for long periods. Also things like navigation, some limited irrigation, but all under very detailed rules and regulations laid out in the treaty annexures.
Okay, so checks and balances built in.
Exactly. And there was even a 10-year transition period built in. India agreed to keep supplying water from the eastern rivers until Pakistan could build the infrastructure, the link canals, to properly utilize the western rivers they had been allocated.
That seems surprisingly cooperative, given the context.
It was. And perhaps the most crucial part for making it last was the Permanent Indus Commission, the PIC.
The PIC, right. Tell us about that.
It's a body with one commissioner from India and one from Pakistan. Their mandate is to meet regularly, at least once a year, exchange data on river flows and projects, inspect sites on both sides, and critically, to resolve questions or differences about the treaty's interpretation or implementation. It's this mandated, regular contact, this mechanism for continuous cooperation that's really key.
Keeping the dialogue going, even when political relations are frosty.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is how it established this channel that had to keep functioning.
And what if the PIC couldn't agree on something if a question became a bigger problem?
Well, that's where the treaty's famous dispute resolution mechanism comes in. It's 3-tiered.
Okay.
First, you have questions handled by the PIC. If they can't resolve it, it becomes a
The
difference.
difference. And then...
That gets referred to a neutral expert, usually appointed by the World Bank, someone impartial to look at the technical issues.
Okay, a neutral third party. Makes sense.
And if even that doesn't resolve it, if the disagreement is more fundamental, it escalates to a dispute.
The final stage.
Right. And that goes to a formal court of arbitration, a 7-member court, set up specifically for the issue. It's designed to be, a really robust process, almost legally airtight.
So a system designed for the long haul, designed to handle disagreements. And for, over 60 years, it largely worked.
It did. It's often called one of the most successful water treaties ever, despite all the wars and crises between the two countries.
But now, things seem to be changing dramatically. Despite that reputation, the treaty's under, unprecedented strain.
That's putting it mildly, yeah.
Yeah.
The last few years, and especially recent months, have been critical.
So let's get into the current situation. As of now, June 2025, what's the core issue?
Well, the trigger seems to have been a major terrorist attack in Indian-administered Kashmir back in April 2025. India blamed Pakistan-based groups.
Okay. And the response regarding the treaty.
India announced it would, quote, never restore the Indus Waters Treaty. They've stated their participation is in abeyance.
Abeyance. That's a specific term, isn't it? Sort of like suspended,
Yeah.
paused indefinitely.
Essentially, yes. A state of temporary disuse or suspension. Now, it's really important, as you said, for us just reporting the source material here. We're not taking sides or endorsing any viewpoint on the attack claims or the legality of this.
Right, impartial guides. But the big question this raises is, can one side just unilaterally put a treaty like this into abeyance? Does the treaty itself allow for that?
That's precisely the point of contention. Pakistan argues vehemently that it does not.
And there were statements from Indian officials, too.
Yes. India's Home Minister, Amit Shah, spoke about diverting water that currently flows to Pakistan, specifically mentioned building a canal to divert water to Rajasthan for India's internal use.
Diverting water from the western rivers.
That seems to be the implication, though the specifics of how and which water weren't fully detailed in the reports we saw. Plus, India formally asked the World Bank's neutral expert to pause ongoing proceedings.
What proceedings were those?
They're related to existing disputes over 2 Indian hydropower projects on the western rivers Kishinganga and Radal. India cited the treaty's abeyance as the reason for requesting the pause.
So connecting the suspension of the treaty directly to pausing the dispute resolution process.
Exactly. It's a significant move. It's not just rhetoric. It's actively disengaging from the treaty's mechanisms.
And this raises huge questions, doesn't it, about the treaty's future, international law.
Absolutely. It potentially undermines the whole framework and the role of bodies like the World Bank as guarantors or mediators. What does it mean if a signatory can just opt out when things get tough?
So what was Pakistan's reaction to all this? Abeyance, talk of diversion, pausing dispute resolution?
Predictably, strong objection. They called India's decision unilateral and illegal.
Using that specific language, illegal.
Yes. Officials, including the former Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, were quoted stating very clearly that the treaty doesn't allow for unilateral suspension or termination.
And they framed it in quite stark terms, didn't they?
Extremely stark. They said any attempt by India to actually violate Pakistan's water rights under the treaty, like significantly diverting the western rivers, would be considered an act of aggression.
An act of aggression, that's a serious language between nuclear-armed states.
It is. It escalates things significantly beyond just a legal or diplomatic dispute. Pakistan has also appealed to India to reconsider, emphasizing how millions depend on this regulated water.
And are they pursuing other avenues?
Legally. They've stated they're exploring legal challenges under international law, but stepping back, the immediate impact is a massive spike in tensions. Pakistan is already water-stressed. This hits a critical vulnerability.
Right, so the stakes are incredibly high. Let's talk about those potential consequences. If India were to permanently withdraw or just continue this abeyance indefinitely and actively restrict the flow of those western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, the source material uses the word catastrophic for Pakistan.
It's hard to overstate the potential impact. It's not just about water scarcity. It's a cascade of potential crises: humanitarian, economic, security.
Let's break that down. Agriculture first. You mentioned Pakistan's dependence. What are the numbers?
Something like 80% of Pakistan's cultivated land relies on irrigation from the Indus system. That's huge. And about 93% of that water goes to agriculture.
Okay, so agriculture is overwhelmingly dependent. What happens if that water flow is significantly cut?
Widespread crop failure. Wheat, rice, sugarcane, cotton, the staples of their agriculture and economy. It wouldn't just be an economic hit. It would be a direct threat to food security for over 230 million people. a massive food crisis.
And the economic fallout beyond just the crops themselves.
Agriculture is a cornerstone of Pakistan's GDP, its economy. A collapse there means huge economic losses, massive rural unemployment as farms fail, farmers defaulting on loans. It ripples through the entire economy.
It really shows how fundamental water is. It's not just for drinking.
It's the bedrock of the economy in many ways for Pakistan.
Okay, so food and economy devastated. What about, well, basic needs? Drinking water, urban centers.
Major cities like Karachi, Lahore, Multan, they rely heavily on the Indus system for their municipal water supply.
So reduced flows mean?
Severe drinking water shortages for millions in the cities. And that leads almost inevitably to public health crises. Think waterborne diseases like cholera spreading. And beyond health, it's a recipe for social unrest. Protests, instability, potentially people having to leave their homes, becoming internally displaced.
A real nightmare scenario for urban areas. Then there's energy. You mentioned hydropower earlier.
Yes, Pakistan is heavily reliant on hydropower dams built on the western rivers. Tarbela Dam on the Indus, Mangla Dam on the Jhelum. These are crucial power sources.
So less water means?
Less power, crippled hydropower plants, severe electricity shortages, widespread blackouts. That hits industries, businesses, daily life, compounding the economic crisis. It's another layer of instability.
It just compounds everything else.
Precisely. Energy security and water security are totally intertwined there.
And all of this is happening to a country that, as you said, is already facing water issues.
Exactly. Pakistan is already one of the most water-stressed countries in the world. Per capita, water availability has plummeted over the decades. So losing the treaty's regulation, losing that guaranteed flow, it pushes them from stressed into potentially critical crisis territory.
And that's before we even factor in climate change.
Right. Climate change is already impacting the region. Glacier melt, changing flow patterns, more unpredictable monsoons. Removing the treaty framework would just amplify vulnerability to all those climate impacts. It's like removing the safety net during a storm.
Which brings us back to that phrase, act of aggression, the security implications.
This is perhaps the most dangerous aspect. Pakistan has been very clear, repeatedly stating that a unilateral abrogation or a significant cut in water flow would be seen as an act of aggression, even an act of war.
Between two countries with nuclear weapons.
Yes. The potential for miscalculation, for escalation into actual military conflict, is terrifyingly real. Water scarcity has historically been a driver of conflict, and here the stakes are as high as they get.
And internationally, would there be consequences for unilaterally walking away from such a long-standing World Bank brokered treaty?
You'd expect widespread international condemnation. It undermines the principles of international law and treaty commitments. It could lead to diplomatic isolation, potentially even sanctions, especially given the World Bank's deep historical involvement.
So diplomatic and potentially economic pressure, too.
Plus, the potential for a massive refugee crisis if things got really bad internally in Pakistan due to water scarcity, people moving within the country or even trying to cross borders. The instability wouldn't necessarily stay contained.
So looking at the whole picture, catastrophic seems like the right word. The potential impacts are just staggering.
They really are. It touches every aspect of life and stability in Pakistan and has major regional and even global security implications.
What an incredible story this treaty has from, this beacon of cooperation, this example of how adversaries could manage a shared resource, to now standing on this precipice. The potential consequences, as we've just heard, are devastating, potentially irreversible for millions.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile these agreements can be, even ones that seem robust for decades.
And it really puts a spotlight on the role of the international community, doesn't it? Particularly the World Bank, given its history with the treaty. De-escalating this, trying to uphold that framework, seems absolutely critical right now.
It does. Their role as a potential mediator or guarantor is probably more important than ever, but the challenges are immense.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe the final thought to leave our listeners with. Considering everything we've discussed, the humanitarian risks, the economic collapse, the geopolitical dangers described in the source material, what does this whole situation tell us about the future? The future of sharing water, especially as the world gets more water-stressed, more politically volatile.
That's the crucial question, isn't it? If a treaty this established, this historically significant, can be put in jeopardy like this, what hope is there for newer, perhaps less robust water-sharing agreements elsewhere in the world facing similar pressures? It's a deeply sobering thought.